It frees up space for other more important things.
Yeah.
Well, that's the positive spin.
Yes. Yes. All right. I don't see us live yet, but probably any second
It's
now.
it's working. It's getting
Okay.
it. There's about a 2 minute
Yeah.
lag
I
between.
guess got it. Yep. The meeting is being live streamed. Good.
All right.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to see it in Spring Nuts.
Share to Spring Nuts. All right, share to Spring Nuts,
Yeah,
and
I
I will
just got it.
share
Ryan
to
Hilligoss is
Spring
live.
Nuts
Yep, I see
Cafe.
it.
Yep, we got it. All right.
All right, we're good. We're off and running.
Okay.
All right. Howie?
Yep. Okay. Just making sure we're in. No, I'm sorry. I was making sure
Yep,
we're live. I
we're
wanted
good.
it was in both groups. We have a Spring Nut Cafe group, and we have a Spring Nut group, and we have Ryan's group. Okay, okay, we're all good. All right. We want to welcome everyone to another edition of the Spring Nut Cafe. As you know, we are bringing on the top guests in the world, and we are searching and we are finding. And I've been trying to get this next guest for a while. Okay. And he's been gracious to find some time in his busy schedule. Trust me, he is a very busy guy. And he is joining us tonight. He is an author, he is a musician, he's many things which you're going to learn about tonight. And I would like to bring on and welcome with us, welcome to the one and only Warren Zanes.
Thank you
Excellent.
so much,
Excellent.
Howie. It's really nice to be here.
The pleasure's ours, brother, and really, it's a real honor to have you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Ryan and stand here. I'm just going to put. Unfortunately, Julie cannot be with us tonight. She wasn't feeling so well, but she'll be chiming in from time to time. We missed you, babe, but tonight the boys will handle it. And with that said, Ryan, take it away.
All right, Warren, thank you for doing this. This is an honor for me to be able to talk to you and have a conversation with you. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Just as a way of introduction, cause I'm sometimes I'm talking to the people on Facebook. So for those of you that don't know Warren or are unfamiliar, member of the Del Fuegos, solo recording artist himself, PhD in visual and cultural studies, former vice president of education and public affairs at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Woohoo! One of my favorite places in the world. Executive director of the Stevie Van Zandt Rock and Roll Forever Foundation, teacher, and author of three things that I have: Dusty Springfield, Dusty in Memphis, part of the 33 and a third series, which is excellent. For those of you out there that don't know, check out Warren's book and check out any book in the series is awesome. I don't care who it is. And then we have Tom Petty. Warren, I have to say, just personally, as a thank you, I was always a Tom fan, but I wasn't a huge fan, and over the years I grew up in 74, so he was like right in that same age group as Bruce and Bob and John and all those guys. But I wasn't a huge fan, and then after he passed away, unfortunately, two things really made me have an appreciation and greater understanding of him and his work, which were listening to his Buried Treasure shows on his station, which is,
Yeah.
if you don't know him, he's just got such a dry, witty, weird sense of humor sometimes. So when he does his own voice tracks and stuff and the jokes and the next 20 minutes are going to knock your possum cold or something like that. He's just, so that and reading your book, seriously, gave me a whole different understanding and appreciation
Oh,
of
thank you.
Tom Petty.
That is meaningful.
And then, of course, we've got Deliver Me From Nowhere, which is why we're talking. Um, as a lead into that, I wanted to, if you don't mind, I'm just going to say this to you. You wrote something after Tom passed in Rolling Stone, which is not behind a paywall. You can go on there right now after this and read it if you want. But it was kind of a addendum or a secondary piece to the book in a way. Uh, it's about coffee. And for those of you listening to this and be like, coffee, what? Trust me, it's well worth the read. And it explains so much of what Tom Petty was about. He's talking about coffee, and it's a lengthy essay. What he was after in a cup of coffee, he explained, was something he found in a Gainesville diner where he could sit for hours getting refills, wrapping his fingers around a cup that kept being replenished. This, I came to believe, is what this coffee story was all about. It wasn't about coffee, not exactly. It was that place, that Gainesville diner. It was the time. It was being high on dirt weed and drinking 7 cups of coffee, talking about Wilson Pickett, the Beach Boys, Cream. It was no one throwing you out when you couldn't scrape together the money for a piece of pie. It was a workshop where you couldn't build scale models of your dreams. And that perfect cup of coffee Tom Petty served me on Malibu afternoons. Every cup of Maxwell House exactly level. He could almost experience, almost feel something he couldn't completely get back to. That coffee, I came to believe, was his rosebud. We were not talking about a hot drink any more than Charles Foster Kane was talking about a sled. It was really about a moment in Petty's life when the world was in front of him, when he could feel the closeness of that kid, crazy for rock and roll, before the disappointments that came even to the star's life. We were talking about a cup of coffee, but a cup of coffee into which a world could be poured. Oh my God. That's like one of the best pieces of writing I've ever read. I don't care if it's about rock and roll or anything.
Well, thank you so much. And I'll tell you, when they reached out to me about writing something, it meant a lot, to have Rolling Stone ask me to remember him in that way. And there are some really good minds at Rolling Stone, but I knew I wanted to let it rip, and I didn't want to be edited. And editors are great things. So this wasn't me thinking I was above it, but I knew Tom had told me this coffee story that's in the body of that piece. And it felt like if I could have written the book again, I would have added it. But it wasn't meant to be that. It was meant to be this other thing. And so I said to the guys at Rolling Stone, I said, if you let me write this just the way I want, you can pay me whatever you want. And it was a deal they couldn't refuse. And so I didn't get paid a whole lot, but that piece, God, it's really nice hearing you read it, because I put a lot of my love for Tom Petty into that piece. And
That's very clear. Your love of him as a person, as a musician, as an artist, like it's very clear.
yeah, he, you know, Tom Petty, Bruce Springsteen. There are some other names, but we were up there in New Hampshire, and as I often say, my mother had a great record collection, and my uncle listened to oldies radio. We knew the good stuff, and then those artists came along, and they encompassed so much of that good stuff, but they belonged to us. And we're talking about artists that are just in my blood, like they're in the blood of so many of you.
So there's one piece in the Petty book where you kind of talk about Bruce and Tom having an afternoon. If you wouldn't mind sharing, because that's leading
Yeah.
into where we're going with this. But if you don't mind sharing that that
Yeah,
moment.
yeah. Like these guys, their paths crossed. I think in the deepest way through Jimmy Iovine, because Jimmy kind of went from Bruce World over to Petty's. After Jimmy did the Patti Smith, Petty had done the first 2 records with Denny Cordell, who, however different from Mike Appel, he was kind of the equivalent in the Petty story. And there were contract renegotiations involved. So those guys were on kind of parallel courses. And Jimmy came over as producer on Damn the Torpedoes. And that was Tom's Born to Run, it was that third record, Magic. And so I think Jimmy was this almost ambassadorial figure who brought them together. And so, they went to one another's sessions, not for long stays, but they visited, there's a real intimacy letting someone come to your recording session. And, they asked one another's opinions and respected one another's bands and listened to a lot of the same stuff. And they both loved Elvis at a very high level. And so there's, Petty out in LA, and he just bought his first Camaro. These guys they're Camaro guys too. And Springsteen's got a night off in LA, and he calls Petty and says, what are you doing? Like, let's hang out. And so Petty drives in his new Camaro. I think it was down to the Roosevelt Hotel, and picks up Springsteen, and they go to Tower on Sunset, and they get Petty said it was 8 tracks, 5 8 tracks. They buy them, and they drive until they've listened to everyone all the way through. Just two rock and roll fans. And I'd give good money to know the 5 titles. But Petty only remembered one of them, which was the Rolling Stones 12 by 5. And the detail that he remembered best was when the song Congratulations came on. Bruce raised his hands to the air and said, "You can take me now." And Petty said, "I always loved that." And the way he said it was so moving to me. Because we think of them as, yes, they have crossover, but they're also in competition with one another. Young men trying to forge these careers in the very same spot out there in the world. And there was some kind of tenderness. And Petty didn't show tenderness all the time, but he showed it when he was talking about Bruce and that anecdote. It just moved me, really deeply. And then I looked at Petty and I said, so Bruce has a night off and he calls you up. And it's not that you guys know each other that well. I said, would you ever do something like that? And Petty looked at me and said, I wouldn't. And I said, there's some magic. That's some Bruce magic that he does shit like that. And yeah, so thank you also for zeroing on that one. Because it's like there's a little story that on some level you could say, what does that have to do with the Tom Petty story? To me, it's crucial. I think there's so much information that's not overtly shared in a little anecdote like that. There's something about what are you trying to do in books? You're trying to develop characters and impart a sense for histories. But that character development sometimes comes through these odd stories. And that's the job of the writers, to identify them. Not to present them all, but to present the ones that the writer can best expose some aspect of the character.
And that's why with this coffee article, and again, anybody can go check it out right now. It's not behind a paywall. You can read it now. Um, you're talking about a cup of coffee. Well, what can you say about a cup of coffee? It's a whole thing. It's the whole universe of who Tom is as a person and why the coffee. And for those of you watching, Tom goes to have lunch with his wife or something, and the coffee's great. And Tom says, I'm going to go find out. So he goes and talks to the manager, and what are you doing? I want to see it. Well, here's our Bun automatic coffee maker, which is the same bun that we all see across the country. Okay, now you got the bun. Well, now what? Well, I scoop off, level every cup, every ground. Okay, it had to be exact, and that is who Tom was. When it came to his music and his lyrics and the band and his recordings, it had to be exact.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that coffee, that cup of coffee is much more than a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Well, thank you for selling that piece of writing.
So I have to just on that. When I was reading your book about Tom, like I'm a Bruce fan, obviously, and I knew Tom's music, but I didn't know the story other than the basics. But there's a lot of parallels there between Tom and Bruce in
Yep.
their upbringings. And yes, one was in Gainesville, Florida, which Tom jokes was he said North Florida is like Southern Georgia, very
Yeah.
rednecky. But that's what Bruce grew up like, very similar with their parents, their dads, what was going on, their economic backgrounds. There's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah, and some difficulty in their backgrounds, and then a kind of rock and roll emancipation, which is not a complete emancipation. It comes with a new set of struggles, but the way out of the first struggles was rock and roll.
And both of them were and they both have said this, like, there was no other choice. Like, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm gonna be a musician. There was no choice. That's what they were
Yeah.
gonna be.
At toward the end of Tom's life, at some point, he lived in Malibu. He was down the road from Lou Adler, and Lou Adler and Jack Nicholson shared Lakers tickets, and they started giving their Lakers tickets to Petty when they weren't using them, and he became a basketball fan. And I remember in the management office, this information was shared with a sense of awe. Like, wait a second, Tom's into basketball? Like, because he'd been that guy with that focus on one thing his entire life. Like the news goes around the office, Tom's got a hobby. He did the same thing with fishing. He got a lake house that he had, again in the last decade of his life, and these things come late because to really pursue that life, it almost demands that you put everything else aside. And the people who do it best, I think, don't have plan Bs. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, but the guys with no plan B, who put everything on that, all their chips on that one thing, there's some kind of obsession and intensity that if they've got the talent and the taste, these things mix together really well.
I remember when Bruce said about playing the Super Bowl that the one person he talked to was Tom, and to get it about what he thought it was. And that's where he said, "Yeah, Tom said it was good, so I'm going to do it too." Right?
Yeah, I remember I was in Petty World during that time, and it was, obviously Super Bowl shows were fairly different. They were really doing performances like they do on the road, just a little tighter in the production, but they were getting up and playing rock and roll. And Petty could be toward the end of his career, he would get pretty nervous about going out on stage. And I remember that like being an issue, but still it's like the Super Bowl as a cultural social thing crosses over in a pretty big way.
The part that gets me, and it's tragic, so I don't want to dwell on it, and then we'll get on to why we're here. But the thing that killed me to read after the fact was he knew that he had a cracked hip, and his doctor said you need to stay home, and we need to fix this. He knew that his band, his crew, and the fans were counting on him, and this is how serious he takes this. Life or death. He did not want to let anybody down. The band, the crew, his family, the fans. He went out there on stage with a cracked hip for 40 shows and laid it out there every night.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish the story ended differently.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go on to Deliver Me from Nowhere. So, just for anybody watching at home, there's a PBS special that aired basically Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska. Fantastic lineup, and I have a question for you as a lead into the book. You can watch it for free. I think you can stream it on pbs.org if
I,
you haven't seen it.
I think you have to belong to Passport.
Passport. Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I wish it were just there and available, but
It's great. So just the lineup, and it's an interesting lineup. So you got Price You Pay from Emmy Lou, Mansion on the Hill from the Lumineers, one of my favorite newer bands, Nebraska from Emmy Lou, Used Car from Lyle Lovett, State Trooper from the Lumineers, Atlantic City from Noah, My Father's House from Lyle Lovett, and then Lucinda doing Born USA in that only Lucinda voice, and then Eric Church with Dancing in the Dark. So as a lead into the book, you lead it off with The Price You Pay, The Heart of Nebraska, and then two tracks from Born USA. Those three albums obviously are connected, and you talk
yeah.
about that in the book. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, well, obviously, the movie does a really good job at getting at this kind of, for lack of a better description, mental health crisis that Bruce faces coming off of the River Tour. And the artifact of that time is the Nebraska record, but there are these traces of it in the river that one of my favorite songs is Stolen Car. And I love Patty Griffin's version of that song too, which is just I think a lot of people were introduced to Bruce's version through Patty's in a strange way. Meaning among Patty fans. But there's some hint that something's going on, and we were talking earlier about how, rock and roll did give these young working class people from homes where there were some tough experiences a way out. But it's not a complete answer. And so the unresolved, as it is with human beings generally, the unresolved waits. And I think what happened as he's coming off the River Tour is the unresolved in his life was waiting. And he's an interesting case study because he's so like he's an organic intellectual. His capacity to self-investigate is remarkable to me. I'd happily pay for some of that for myself. But he's watching a kind of he's losing the thread. He's losing his connection to the things that he thought were solid, that could be a mooring for him. And he starts to get untethered. And, the reason on that show, I wanted a piece of the river just to kind of chart the course. But Emmy Lou the price you pay does it well enough. If I had any choice, it would probably be Stolen Car. But Emmy Lou had cut her version of The Price You Pay. It felt like when you organize an event like this, you gotta understand that the gods have a 51% share. So you cannot go to artists and say, I want you to do this. You can manipulate a little bit to get them to do what you want, but really you got to leave it in their hands. So The Price You Pay felt right. But I knew toward the end I really wanted the Nebraska version of Born in the USA. And Lucinda, just for the kind of grit and intensity of that version, she just seemed great. And she'd never done it. So she was sending videotapes of her learning it, saying, like, what do you think of this? And these are privileged environments to be in. And then Eric Church came, he was the last artist on that bill. And, he's obviously a very outspoken Bruce Springsteen fan. And he came in saying, I would like to do a solo Dancing in the Dark. So that was like a natural thing. But that scope, the story really is one of a person hitting a kind of bottom and then saving themselves by asking for help, by identifying the fact that the things they thought, what he calls his rock and roll meds, things he thought were going to get him through it aren't doing it. He's got to try something new. And then, those 2 years, fair amount of time for a record maker like Bruce goes by before we see Born in the USA. And, I just love the whole arc of that story. And when I was writing the book and putting together the PBS show, I liked it because, my ultimate measure is like, is this a story I would like my sons to know of? And this was definitely one because to different degrees, we all get lost. And there's often some unresolved thing from our pasts in that lostness. And we need guides. We need, however strong we are in the eyes of the public, there are going to be times where we need those guides. And we need to grieve something. And as a culture, I think we are not good at grieving. I don't think we're good at grieving the loss of marriages. I don't think we're good at grieving the loss of jobs. I don't think we're good at grieving the loss of our adult powers as we get older. And this is a story about someone processing something, and to me, becoming a man. And yeah, so I don't know. You set me off on something, and
No,
I
no,
Great.
it's fine. And for those
whatever the original question
Oh,
was.
you covered it and then some. So I love it. I like to just ask open-ended questions and see where it goes. So but for those of you watching at home, again, check it out. It's truly great. Warren does readings from the book, and the readings that you pick, flow directly into what the songs are going to be played. Just since you brought it up, Eric Church, and you brought up Bruce, reaching out to Tom back in 1977. He does that. He did that with Eric Church. He's done it with Jason Isbell. We've had
Yeah,
guests on here that we've talked to that they've had Jesse Malin and other people that those same things.
yeah,
The thing I loved about Jason Isbell, I don't know where he was at, but he was playing and he's standing in the wings getting ready to go on stage. And this is when Traveling Alone was huge. He's standing there literally waiting to go on stage, and somebody walks up behind him, and he hears somebody singing, "I'm tired of traveling alone." It's it's
That's not
Bruce.
bad. Not bad,
It's,
Brian. Nice job.
but it's Bruce singing into Jason's ear as he's getting ready to go on stage, and Jason said, like, out of his whole career, like that was validation enough for him. He
yeah,
never needs anything else. And then with Church, Bruce just unknowns to Eric, he went to his show and he sent him a letter backstage, and then Eric found it and read it, and Bruce went on the bus and after the show, and they sat and talked for an hour, and it was just like, here's this legendary guy coming to give this younger artist like a boost, just because he
yeah,
appreciated his work, and he
yeah.
does that time after time after time.
Well, I have often said I can't find anyone better at being Bruce Springsteen than Bruce Springsteen. Like he really knows how to be that guy. And it's it's very meaningful. And not everybody. It's funny. I actually just spent the afternoon with John Landau, and I was talking to him about Arthur Brooks' book From Strength to Strength. So Arthur Brooks is the Harvard professor who does a class on happiness. He does it in the business school, the kind of he's in a it's business leadership, but it's the most popular class at Harvard is a class on happiness. And something that Arthur Brooks is trying to identify is that point at which people, what he calls strivers, where strivers need to stop striving Because the ones who just strive all the way to their deathbed tend to die unhappy. Because they're clawing. And that clawing, he's not out to say the clawing is bad. He's saying the clawing is appropriate to a certain point in life. And then you become, he's like, well, who can what's a profession where you can get older and not do the striving kind of natural? And he's like, well, historians, teachers, and a lot of people, the turn in the road to go from striving into some second chapter that's not based on that striving, they tend to have some teacher-like element to their character. And I'm only reading it because it's helping me to understand Bruce, because I think he did that turn in the road. And he's taken on this elder statesman role, without being sanctimonious about it, without being sentimental about it. Just exactly like you described, showing up backstage and singing the artist's song, in the dark behind him, with some humor, but with some love and some admiration for the next generation coming up. It's like he does it so consciously that it makes me think he's thought about this. He's thought about who he is and what he can do with who he is. And a lot of admiration for that part of his character.
Well, one thing you write about in the book, you're talking about Scott Kipner, and it's 1972. Rod Stewart and the Faces are playing. Scott Kempner goes to get food because they're struggling artists. They don't have food in the groceries in the refrigerator. So Kempner goes to get food at the buffet before the show, and he's looking for a place to sit, and he sees some guy sitting over by himself with some chairs, and he walks over and, oh my God, it's Bruce Springsteen, and he's stumbling along, and oh my God, Bruce, I've loved Wild and the Innocent. I've listened to it for 6 months, and Bruce, he says, we're label mates. I'm with the dictator. Bruce jumps up. You're with the dictators? You have to sit down. And he sat down and talked for an hour. So that same stuff that he's doing today with these other artists, he was doing 55 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. The only difference that I'd isolate is, there with Scott Kemner, it is more peer to peer still. And so now, like with Jason Isbell, there is an elder statesman, and I think we need elders. And I think it's a category we have to attend to. We need examples of it, and we need more of them. So I want more of them in my life. When I was a graduate student, there were the hot professors who were, publishing the important books, and they were impressive, and they could lead great seminars and really have an impact on you. But if they were too busy with their careers, they didn't have the mentoring time. And so it's a balance of those things. Like, I want the hot shots and I want the mentors. And the mentors have more time for it at a later stage, and they're better at it. But Bruce, not everybody has that. There are pictures, a picture of Petty with Bob Seger and a picture of Bruce with Bob Seger when they're younger. And the way these guys are smiling with Bob Seger makes me think that Seger had a little of that. He wasn't that much older, but he's a little older, if I got it right. But Seger had been doing it longer than they had, even if by only a few years. But, Tom Petty didn't give out smiles for free. And you look at this picture of him with Bob Seger, it is like it's got some magic. And the one of Bruce with Seger when he's young, same thing. Like I've been trying to find, like, in a book, where would it make sense to have them together? Because I think sometimes we forget about what a deep cat Bob Seger is. When I heard Night Moves,
Hmm.
that was one of those songs in that same period. I'm up there in New Hampshire, and I'm like, there was something going on in Night Moves that it still gets me. I'll get my Spotify Wrapped, and that song will show up. I don't even know how much I go to. It's funny,
Great song.
All right, so there's a couple of sections I wanted to read and just as an open discussion, but on page 18, this is one of the clearest, most colorful descriptions of the Nebraska that I've heard. Page 18. The scurry to figure out what Nebraska was, it was Bruce Springsteen's follow-up to the river, so it was natural that there would be great interest. Obscured the brute fact this was one of popular music's most enigmatic moments ever. This wasn't an early version of the unplugged phenomenon, which would involve artists on stools making beautifully recorded versions of their hits without bringing a drummer to the gig. This was the sound of a man forcing out songs while held under water, a rough hand on his neck. He was poised to go big, then didn't. He all but went into hiding. Held under water, a rough hand on his neck.
I like the passages you pick.
Dude, they're so descriptive. Like,
Yeah.
that's one thing that a lot of people, and I thought this myself, like, this is very complex, uh, integrated material, but it was incredibly readable. And that's like the sign of a great writer. And I'm not trying to blow smoke up. I'm not just saying this because you're here. I've
Well,
told
thank
people
you.
this. It was very readable. It was quick. When I first got it, it was not what I was expecting. I was expecting a normal deep dive into Nebraska, the songs, the lyrics, where that was coming from. That's not what this is. So it was very readable, but incredibly complex and dark
Well,
material.
Peter Goralnick has always been a good friend to me. And when we talk sometimes about writing, mostly it's about parenting. Sometimes we talk about sports, like tennis and baseball really matter to him. But whatever he's talking about, you're going to get something valuable. But when it came to writing, he really is like, avoid the cliche at all costs. And that sounds very straightforward. It's not an original idea. But when you really attend to it, uh, it makes writing a harder job. But for the reader, it makes the writing come alive more. The number of times, electric guitar has been called screeching electric guitar. We can't count them. It's like, take the time, find another way. So that image, like, of someone being held underwater with a rough hand on their neck. This is obviously not a description of what happened, but what kind of spot was he in? And how can I find an original image to kind of get the intensity of that moment in his life? And for me as a writer, it's like some good teachers. I also have a great editor, and my agent is himself a great editor. I think sometimes people go with the Hollywood version of agents. They're kind of smooth talking, buying really expensive cocktails, at wearing really fine suits. And a great agent can get in at the sentence level and help you with writing. A great agent can also help you negotiate. When you come into a world where there's a John Landau and a Bruce Springsteen, that's a complicated world. Like, I really like these guys. That doesn't mean their world isn't very complicated. And sometimes your agent can be the person helping you. And for me, I'm another guy who didn't have a dad around. And sometimes things that people who, had a father modeling for them or a mother who did that, things come almost intuitively. Sometimes I'm baffled. I'm in a complex world with a superstar and his manager, and I actually don't know what my next move is, because it wasn't modeled for me. So an agent can be like, can talk to you and go, well, here's how you got to think about these guys. They're really busy with this. They have to prioritize around this and really kind of lay the table and go, okay, okay. Because you want to enter these lives in such a way that you get asked back without losing your integrity as a writer. And this situation is easier because these are people who want a good, honest account. I've never been asked to tell an untruth, but you want to behave in such a way that you're not taking up too much space. You're not there when you're not wanted. You don't show up with food all over your bib. And an agent can help guide you through this. Like in these book projects, I do feel like I've grown up a little bit. I've gotten better at being a dad just by getting better at being with people with these big lives, because it's different.
Well,
Or
you
where
even
did you come up with the idea for the book? Was it something you'd been thinking about for years, and then just approach Bruce and John Landau, and how did that all work out?
Well, I mean, I'd had a few book ideas that didn't work out after Petty, and one of them, I wanted to do something on the Stones' "Some Girls" record.
Hmm.
I just think it's historically really important. It's a real turning point in the Stones. It's the first record where Ron Wood's there. Keith Richards is just coming off that heroin bust in Toronto. They're fusing things that others didn't fuse with punk and disco, yet there's so much guitar on that record. I think Mick's playing on more than half the songs. You got this three guitar army, and it's a different sound than a lot of Stones records. And for a time, it was their biggest selling. And so there was a lot. And then Jan Wenner helped me. He was like, I think there's something here, and I'll connect you with Mick. And so I got a proposal to Mick, and he was like, if somebody's going to write about Some Girls, why wouldn't it be me? And it was like, what? You're not going to write that book, but that was it. It was over. And then you're back to square one. But after that, my mind was in well, let me just think about what I believe are the most important records of my time. And to me, Nebraska was more important than Some Girls. It was personally and in terms of its impact on musicians. That was my starting point. That is a reference for a lot of musicians. If Bruce Springsteen can do that, what can I do? It just busted things open for a lot of people. Just the idea that on the heels of his first #1 record, he's going to go into his bedroom and record on a 4-track cassette. Forget even listening to it. The idea in and of itself busts some walls down for artists. So these are the ideas that I was thinking about. And then I was also, there's a lot when I was young and I started really connecting with Bruce. It was often just that that bit of redemption. You know, Thunder Road's got it, Born to Run's got it, a lot has like like it gives me that light. It gives me difficult situations, it gives me loss, it gives me longing, but it gives me that light. And suddenly here's Nebraska and it doesn't. And I'm thinking like, well, why did it matter to me as it did without that redemption? And so I had questions I wanted to ask. You know, in relation to that last question, I think the redemption comes when a person is in a dark place and they create a work of art and they hand it to you. The redemption is not in, doesn't have to be in the work of art. It's in the artist handing it to you. It's him giving it to us. That's where the redemption is. But I used to look for it in the songs. And now it was in the act itself. But when I saw the overlap with Born in the USA and Nebraska, which I didn't know the extent of it, uh, then I felt like, there's a little bit of a detective element. Even if other people already knew that, I didn't. And it was like, whoa, there's even more here. He took something that was going to be his commercial breakthrough and he put it on the shelf so that he could release this record as John Landau, rightly says, like of those early period records, like right through Tunnel of Love, Nebraska's still the worst selling. It's still the one that takes people a little longer. Like Bruce chose that over the 2/3 of Born in the USA that was done. And he just put them on the shelf. I couldn't have done that. If I had a shot to put out something like, I would never have done it. What made him do it? That might be the question that was the mothership of the questions around the book. And then I was just, lucky enough to get the Bruce interview that I needed. That was, as I've said in most every interview on the subject, that was the spine of this project, was getting him to talk to me as he did.
Warren, on page 60 here, kind of leads to the next question. For some, the personal approach to songwriting might seem like a choice to be made, almost a stylistic decision. For Springsteen, it would never be that. It's just who he is. And this is a quote. I'm an alienated person by nature, Springsteen told Brian Hyatt in 2010. Always have been, still am to this day. It continues to be an issue in my life, in what I'm always coming from the outside. And I'm always trying to overcome my own internal reticence and alienation, which is funny because I throw myself the opposite way on stage. But the reason I do that is because while the stage and all those people are out there, the abyss is under my heels and I always feel it back there. End quote. The river was only partially about the back there. Nebraska would balance things out. It was all back there. So when you're talking about the back there, are we talking about the psychological part, the darkness that, it becomes clear in the movie? Is that the back there that you referred, the
Yeah.
trauma, everything?
Yeah, it's both. It's the abyss he describes, and it's the historical trauma that informs that abyss. He's and yeah, I love that quote of his. This is a guy who can deliver gold to writers. Like what a powerful description. The way I throw myself a different way out there, and it's like, yeah, but we're so often encountering public figures who are very guarded. They wouldn't talk about themselves as being that alienated. If we had a particular image of them what he's describing on stage. This guy who's like, he's going to lead us in song. He's going to lead us in prayer. Yet he's telling us about this alienation. A lot of people don't hand those kind of complexities over to someone doing an interview with them. But there's a hell of a lot more human truth when they do.
Well, I like to nominate Ryan to do the audiobook for
I thought, hey, I'm just reading what Warren wrote. Like it just flows naturally. It just flows naturally.
I read the book 3 times, and for some reason, I feel like I need someone to read it to me, like you did. So,
Howie, I'll come out once a week. Well, I'll come to your house. I'll read it to you to get you to bed.
I'm very intrigued. I have tears in my eyes.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's funny you say it, but we go out and people sing songs to us,
Right.
And we know how powerful that is. You know, I used to get books of fairy tales to read to young women when I was trying to get them to love me. You know, there's something really powerful reading to each other.
You know what? Had I known back then, I would probably got had a better love life.
Well, it's not. This is what's good about it. And let's talk dating here. If you do that with a prospective partner, they're not going to be expecting it, and it's so intimate, and
Sure.
it's as an offering. It's I had some students at NYU, and this is back when I was dating, and I'm like, I went to the class and I said, okay, imagine this. You're going on a third date. You've written a song for her.
Mm.
Should you give it to her? And my students were more mature than I was, and they all went, don't do it. and because it's this, reading to a person, writing a song for them. These are incredibly intimate things. And, when I offer dating classes, which I've never done, I would say harness that power, but be careful with it.
Mm.
There's a reason we get so close to these people who sing us songs. It's one of the most intimate experiences.
True. It's very. It's true. You're either gonna you'll either know because you either put them to sleep or they're going to be so enamored with you, it's a keeper. So you go either way.
All right, I got one more section I want to read in this for me. There's all the Bruce material, but what you write here explains so much of what was happening then and what we're living through right now to this day, 40 years later. I had to like reread it 3 times. I got up and I was like, I can't even deal with this. A few years after, for those of you keeping track at home, page 219. A few years after its release, Springsteen would admit that Nebraska is about isolation. In 1982, a new isolation was coming that made Nebraska oddly prophetic. Yes, Nebraska stood apart from the gloss, color, and clean lines of 1982's releases, whether Jane Fonda's workout record, which made its way into the movie in a video clip, A Flock of Seagulls, Stray Cats, or Lionel Richie. But viewed in hindsight, the weather captured on Nebraska's cover was closer to the truth of the forecast. The Sony Walkman had already arrived in 1979, same year as the TIAC 144, and it was another way to bring your music with you. In one writer's words, the Walkman would revolutionize the way we listen to music in a way that no other device really had ever done before. Wow. Look at where we're at today. It played a major role in making the cassette the leading format until the CD would take over the marketplace. More importantly, the Walkman got us alone with our music, just as the personal computer would get us alone with everything else. Soon enough, social media would arrive to tell us we weren't alone. Ha! The age of information would at times offer remarkable theaters of human connections that would throw many off the scent. But the fact was that the technologies of isolation were intensifying. Nebraska, even if inadvertently, saw one kind of isolation coming as it looked back on another. Great stuff.
Yeah, I'm teaching my class at NYU right now is on listening. And we start by talking about a crisis of listening. And this is not in relation to music so much as it is how we interact human to human, and this erosion of our capacity to listen, which we all have a share in. It's driven by technology for sure. And the Sony Walkman was part of this. I would now extend it back further because the transistor radio in the mid 50s, right when rock and roll is hitting, the transistor radio comes, and that's a big one. And a lot of people would put it in one ear, and it's an important time because that's when teenagers start listening to a lot of black music. 10 years in advance of the Civil Rights Act. They're crossing color lines through music, and it can't be overstated how important that was. But technologically, you've got this person alone with their music, and the Walkman reinforces that. By the time we get to smartphones, we've got a seriously distracted or absent human being walking the streets. And it's funny, even around my town, and this is not just to get, I think there's a way to not get nostalgic about yesteryear. The point is, we do have to get into a place where we can critically analyze what's going on. But I'll walk down my streets and kids don't really say hi. And I'm in the burbs, they don't say hi like they used to. And then I'm like, well, are the adults doing it? Well, half of them, but a lot are, behind a few layers. And I think, some of the layers they're behind, they do involve those false impressions of connectedness that I'm describing there, that we get from social media and stuff. Oh, I'm in a community. But the fact is, like, there's an epidemic of isolation, and its effects are profound. The stuff we will believe that comes off a computer and a smartphone when we're alone is very different than if we're with a group of 6 people. We kick the tires on that stuff with that group. So you've got people listening to very strong ideas in isolation without the kind of community to filter it together. It's pretty scary, and it's a different kind of isolation. But I think the world of Nebraska has some stories that are the kind of stories that should be passed along about, when the isolation gets too deep, what the costs can be. And it's funny, like, I'm telling this story, there are times where it felt like, wow, this is so of the moment. Like, this record has a voice that just goes so far across the timeline. I'll be reading it with my students, and we'll listen to Nebraska. I bring in a TAC 144. We look at what cassettes look like, and we relate it to this bigger issue of, isolation and how much can go wrong when we start to cut ourselves off. And, re-engaging as listeners is part of the solution, and finding communities and really being with them. And, there are good things that I think this is one of the good things happening. This is an example. You guys form this, this kind of community based on a shared love for an artist, and you physically go do things together, you do things together online, you know, argue about which song is the best on which record. These things get people out of isolation, but it takes some doing.
Yeah.
It takes conscious thought because there are a lot of forces working against it. There, I'll step back from my pulpit.
No,
No,
you know
you're
what? That was phenomenal. So I'm watching the comments, and you know, what you're saying is resonating in so many people, and like you said about having a community like Spring Nuts or whatever it may be, it brings people out of that isolation that so many times we've heard in the past, whether it be our events or whatnot, that there are so many people that were afraid to come out of their shell, they're afraid to join in, they're afraid to be part of it, afraid to come along. And obviously we have to get on our pulpit and say, listen, we have your back, and we want, and they will come out, and it brings it out in them, that with all this isolation. And it's so important, because I couldn't have said it better. You should give a class to Spring Nuts, like, every week. Forget about NYU. We're better than NYU.
No, it's fun. It's with my own kids. One is studying theater. And theater has done so much to get him off of this and with others. And actors have to be keenly aware of the other human beings on the stage with them to be able to do what they do. So it tuned him up in a lot of ways. And then my other son got really into hockey late in high school. Sports get you off the phones and engaging with you. A lot of live music does this. So the value of these pockets of activity, the value's going up.
So I'm gonna bring something up, and it's sort of off, it's along his lines, and I'm sort of stepping across something that I usually don't do, but I'm gonna say it anyway because it's a story that I tell a lot of times. So I'm a religious Jew, and I observe the Sabbath, and sort of my family. And I used to work for a hedge fund, and everyone knew me as being the Jew that was religious and all this stuff, and I used to not be on my phone. Off the grid on Fridays until to the next night, until sundown of the next night. Long story short, I used to, they say, they used to come out because I don't understand you. You mean you don't get on your phone? You know, so I said to one of these traders at the time, I said, and it's, obviously doesn't understand. I said, you know what? It's the one time that me and my children and my wife and we sit at the table together, we talk. There's no phones. We're not slaves to it anymore. And we have to engage with each other, and we're learning about each other's weeks and whatever. And this guy who's a hardliner trader and whatever, and you're like one of those, like, you have to break or take you have to get paid to get a smile out of the guy. He said to me, I wish I had that with my kids. And that's the thing, to detach, to there's a word, there's a phrase that we use. It's disconnect to reconnect, and which means we're disconnecting from our phones and the social media and all this stuff to reconnect with people, it could be, it doesn't have to be a family, it could be with friends and whatever. Just have a conversation and engage and whatever, and put all that other stuff away. So trust me, I get it, and I love the way I'm actually gonna use what you said to have this conversation with my children about it, because it really was profound about how you presented it, and I thank you for that.
Well, it's tough with kids, because there's so much pressure on kind of belonging to your peer group.
Right.
And so much is done like through Instagram. And it's very threatening to not have your phone on. But we need to take a page out of your book, and we can create these kind of, here's where the phones get put down.
Right.
Um, this is, you could, for falling in love with music,
Hmm.
the best way to do it, I think you do need some quiet, some time to discover, not two screens going at once,
Hmm.
to find the song that feels like the one that's telling you something about you that you
Mm.
didn't know. You need quite a bit of focus. And, I definitely had that growing up. I had time with those records. And so now it's not just going to happen. We have to consciously help people find that time. I think, live music, it moves me to see young people have transformative experiences because they're getting the message.
Yeah.
Um, yes, we still see a lot of these in the air.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, so anyway, this is all something to think about. And, for my own kids, I want them to have these lifelong relationships like I have had with Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen. Um, because I feel like I watch these guys grow up.
Mm.
In each phase of their lives, they made these records. And it taught me something about how you go through change. And they're not, because of their success, at a remove from that. And being, you know, honest songwriters, they give us details of it. There's some hope in there.
Oh,
And but you gotta like have the space and time um
yeah.
to forge those relationships,
And the discipline, and it's also about the discipline, not being afraid to. It's okay to miss out on something, because there's always that FOMO. What am I missing? With even for me, I'm like, I wonder what's going on, But it's also a great detox from everything. It really is a good detox where you just you could take time to read a good book like Deliver Me from Nowhere without looking at your phone every 2 seconds, or talk with your family and your friends, or just take a walk and whatever. Just things that when we didn't have the phones back in the day, what did we do? I mean, we lived. It was fine. It was
yeah,
great. We didn't
yeah.
die.
We just did some sessions making Valentines, and it was about as much fun as I've had lately. It was like a really good time doing cutout collage Valentines. And they had a humor and an absurdity and an inappropriateness to them. So, we weren't Boy Scouts about it. But it was everybody sitting around with scissors and glue, and
Right. It was great.
uh, yeah, we just need a higher level of consciousness in doing these things.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Warren, I have to share some, since you brought up kids. I have two kids. My son's 21. He's at school. My daughter's 19. Had a profound moment yesterday. It was through phones. I mean, we're talking about phones and media, but it was incredibly profound. Uh, I took my son to see his first Bruce show 2 years ago. He loved it. He's not a Bruce guy, but he knows that I love Bruce, and I haven't like forced it on him. But he knows, and like I think he's getting a better appreciation. He had a chance to drive to California a couple of months ago, and he texted me. He says, "Dad, I listened to Nebraska twice as I drove through Nebraska. It blew my fucking mind."
Well,
And I was like, because he recognized that, like the isolation that he was physically driving through while he's listening to Isolation from Bruce, it was like a whole different level.
wow,
Um, so he texted me yesterday. He's working on going to grad school, so he's got an advisor, and he's pretty close with her. And he says, "Dad, I got to share this with you." And I was like, "Okay." He says, "I was talking to X, and we were talking about music and the music that we picked up from our parents, and I was telling her that you love Bruce, and she got really quiet. She started to cry, and he didn't know what was wrong. Like he was just talking about Bruce. Her dad had passed away a few months ago from dementia,
Hmm.
And she says, "My dad loved Bruce. I played You're Missing at his funeral."
Hmm.
And like he didn't know that song, like he doesn't know like the rising and that whole part, but he went home and he listened to it and he was just absolutely floored. So just what you're talking about, these
Hmm.
connections that we make, between ourselves and the art and the artist and with each other, profound
Oh.
moments in our lives.
My mother died 2 years ago, and it was she had dementia, and she had some awareness that the movie thing was starting to happen. But like I said earlier, her record collection was really formative for us, and she was the one kind of pushing us into the arts. We didn't have much money, but we had high cultural capital. And so there were books, there were records, we had music lessons. Up in New Hampshire, there was a point where we were all sleeping in one three-season porch, two beds on either side. But in the living room, she had installed a swing, and she had put a wading pool in that had fish in it. And then, a picnic table. It was like other kids came over, and it was wild. Um, but she loved Bruce. She loved Petty. The things, it was her record collection, and then pretty soon it was us bringing stuff in. And that's what she listened to. So she really knew Petty and Bruce really well. But I was at my sister's, and this was toward the end, and my sister was just having a tough time, and I went up, and I was sleeping on the floor next to my mother, and because you really had to be careful where she might go in the night. It was the gritty stuff. It was like using the commode. It was things, a son doesn't want to have to do with his mother, and we're getting ready to go to sleep. This doesn't happen that much, but I got a text from Bruce saying about Scott Kempner. Uh, I'm sorry that we lost our friend. And that again, he didn't need to take time to do that, but he knew that I knew Scott because of the book, the role that Scott got. And I kind of fought for Scott's place in that book because there were people saying, what does he have to do with the story? And I'm saying he's a vessel. He is a vessel of this story, and he's staying. And you know, John and Bruce like Scott's place in there. Uh, but I was texting him, and I just said, and I don't generally share details of my life, but I'm like, I'm here with my mom, and I'm going to sleep on the floor next to her, and it's like, it's closing in over here, and he just wrote back, God bless your mom.
Mm.
And she was there enough that I was able to say, well, you're not going to believe this. And I read, and it was just really like, these artists end up mattering so much. The one, like what you're describing, that generational transmission of them it's like passing along some deep belief that you have. And your kid is like, I choose to share your belief. Really powerful stuff. And, I got up this morning with my younger son is 21, texts me saying, hey, Bruce is playing in Portland. You think I can get tickets?
Oh,
Wink,
welcome to the
wink.
club.
Yeah, yeah. I said that to John because we were talking today, and John I was like, well, I should probably get going. And he was like, yeah, I think I've gotten like 70 emails while we were sitting here. And I said, how many of those are about tickets? He was like, probably most of them. But Piero got hooked on Bruce because of the movie. And because I don't really push my tastes on my guys that much. I'm a little more curious about what they come up with. So I let them be the DJs in the car for the most part. And when I'm writing a book, they can't escape it. But it was the movie that made Piero fall in love with Bruce music. And it's interesting to see that attachment formed. But for me as a dad, it's like, well, I didn't totally fuck this up.
So on that topic, Warren, as an author, as a writer, what was it like for you to see the movie come into fruition and that whole process of watching that actually come alive on the screen?
Yeah, it was an incredible experience. And I actually there's a new edition of the book that has an extended essay
Oh,
about
really?
about the whole making of it and how it went down. I think how it happened is very not Hollywood. Um, and so it's if you have interest in that, it's like a 10,000 word essay. Um, and it's the edition, well, the movie tie-in edition, and then there's another with Frank Stefanko's Nebraska era picture of Bruce on the bed.
Mm.
Um, but this was nothing I was expecting. I mean, who would expect it? But I think Scott Cooper did an incredible job, and Scott Cooper was also really great to me as a writer. And not every writer can say that about adaptation processes. He was really good to me. Bruce and John were really good to me. And so I got to take the whole ride, beginning to end. And when I got to that end, the thing that really stuck with me was 20th Century Studios, a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, just made a movie about Nebraska.
Mm.
If we could travel in time and go to Bruce in 1982 and go, just you wait for the Walt Disney movie. You
Of
know,
Nebraska.
he'd look at us like we were crazy. So I love the fact that a piece of art can go into the world and perform these feats and these tricks and do flips that are way beyond the artist's intention. It's just what the art's doing in the world. And Nebraska is like unbelievable in what it's done. There was an article in Rolling Stone in 82 after Nebraska had been out for a little bit. And the headline was something to the effect of Springsteen acoustic record meets with mixed reviews. Now, the legend of Nebraska has obscured that bumpy ride. So I got to the end of the movie thing and I'm like, I think the movie's going to have the life of the album. I think things are going exactly like they should. I think this is a slow burn because I watched that movie so many times and it kept working. That's what Nebraska did for me. And I think quieter movies are tougher on today's audiences. I think there was that. But I think it's a story and Bruce is such a great believer in this film and supporter of this film. And his God, when he told the story about, I was at the screening where he was watching it with, John Mellencamp on one side and his sister Virginia on the other. And he talked about this at the Telluride Festival that like 2/3 of the way through, Virginia just took his hand and at the end said, this is a real gift to our family. From that point forward, it just felt like, man, this went right. Like that, there's no better reason for a project like this than for that sister to say that to that brother. That, there will be other people worrying about the box office. I don't have to. I'm going to think about that stuff.
Warren, my favorite two parts of the movie were just for the comedic relief. Jimmy Iovine, the real voice of Jimmy Iovine. You mean what? What do you mean? The fucking folk album? He's gonna make the folk album? You can hear him screaming at John. But the scene that really got me, the segment, like I went in with it. I was all wound up, tight, ready for it. What's this gonna be? I was trying to just take it as an observer, not as a Bruce fan, and start nitpicking and all that stuff. But the scene that really got me was Last Mile of the Way with
Oh,
John and Bruce in the bedroom, and just the subtle way of them like holding each other in different ways and touching and holding hands and putting his knee on hand on his knee. Like, yeah, they're manager, artist, the partners or business partners, but in the end, they're just friends. They're great, great friends. And that moment, the way they captured that, and Sammy singing that song, and then the overhead shot of the car going through the forest, that really got me.
yeah, oh God, that was an amazing day on the set. And Jeremy Strong deserves a lot of
Great actor.
credit there. Because he was talking to John Landau and Bruce so much. Really connected. I just emailed with Jeremy Strong and he said, I miss our creative family. Really a meaningful thing to say. But he had that idea of like, is there a song? Is there a song? And it really informed that scene. And there were things like that where at first I was like, I don't know, putting on a song, and then you see it go down. It's like, God, yeah, thank God for people's intuition in these moments. Now, Jimmy, the day they recorded Jimmy, that was on the sound stage, and he was amazing. And everybody's, Jeremy Strong is talking to him, and we can all hear it through the phones. And Jimmy keeps going off script. He like keeps going off script, and there are certain things that he's got to hit, and Scott's kind of, Jimmy's like Bruce is really good at being Bruce. Nobody's better at being Jimmy Iovine than Jimmy Iovine. And he's phoned Jimmy and he's on the phone, but Scott does need some things that are there in the script.
Right.
There was a moment where Jimmy said, but I'm Marlon Brando. And he's an amazing guy. But yeah, everybody's playing somebody else. But when it came to Jimmy, it was like, well, if he's on the phone, can't we have the real thing? And everyone was like, fuck yeah.
I'm going to ask you two questions, and I'm going to read off and I have one for myself. But okay, the first one is the easy one. Where can we see the extended book with that you were mentioning? We can get it from where?
It's out there. It's out there on.
Yeah, it's out there. You can find it in most book places. I was going to say.
It has a different cover, right? The Frank Stefanko photo.
Yes.
Okay. So that's how you could tell the difference. Okay.
Yeah. So there's 3 covers, and the one that's not represented, the one that is represented here is the only one that doesn't have it. So I can, you know what? I can find a much easier way to say that. The original edition doesn't have it. Look for the other covers.
Gotcha. I already got two of the other versions. Okay. All right. So the other question is, which is a good question from Amir. He was saying, do you think there should be or would there be a sequel to the movie?
Um, yeah, it's really hard to come through a process like this and not think about what another one could be. And I'll just tell you my pet version
Mm-hmm.
would go earlier.
Ah.
I personally think that I think we've made a lot of movies about the 70s, but I think the great movie that captures the 70s hasn't been made. And if you start in the steel mill era,
Mm.
surfboard factory, Tinker,
Wow.
you could get a tremendous amount of color,
Mm-hmm.
but you would also see Bruce going through, you know, I would like to see something structured Tinker, Appel, Landau. Because so much is happening in terms of Bruce finding himself as an artist. So let's say you stopped at the bottom line shows
Mm.
and you started maybe I want the surfboard factory in there, but the trip west and the Esalen Institute, I want that in there too.
Mm.
So late steel mill to the bottom line. That's my pitch.
Nice. Like it.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah, I like that. That wasn't an answer I wasn't, I don't think anybody was expecting, but that's
And
great.
Well,
Bruce has Tinker's truck that they drove cross country. I believe after Tinker passed away, Bruce acquired that. So
yeah, Tinker, I was glad that I got to, spend time with him before his passing because, he is an American original.
yes.
That they made one. He is an edition of one.
So the next question is from Kerry Walton, a good friend of ours. Warren, you've had such a variety in your career. What was your favorite job you've ever had?
Being a dad. I don't think you're supposed to think of it as a job, but it sure as hell was one. But there's a lot that came together for me in parenting. Like I said earlier, my own dad, I've met him, 10 times less, something like that. I lived near him at one point and didn't even see him then. And I got to heal a lot of that loss by being present for my own sons. And I probably gotta but there's always the hazard of loving them so much that it puts you in a precarious space because you feel like you couldn't live without them. And I think we all got to watch ourselves. Like there's nobody we can't live without, however hard that is to say. But I love these guys so much, and have become a different person because of them. In other jobs, it's really, really hard to say. But, some days I leave the classroom and I feel like I'm very lucky to have that experience. I enjoy teaching. And then some days I leave the classroom and I go, those little shits. So I don't know. Like I love writing, but I didn't start writing loving it. I really wrote my way to enjoying that process, and it took many, many years and many, many hours.
Mm.
Well, you're really fucking good at it. So, you've done.
Thank you.
Warren, I just have to say about the kids. I got two kids again, 21 and 19. But I was listening to a podcast the other day with Henry Winkler was on with Michelle and Craig Robinson on her podcast, and somebody called in or wrote in and said, Henry, he's got like 5 kids and 10 grandkids. And he's like, oh my God, each grandkid has their own way of hugging me and kissing me and what they call me and blah, blah, blah. They all have their own personalities. But the lady was asking for her own benefit. She said, how do you parent adult kids? And like, yeah, 19 and 21-year-olds aren't adults necessarily, but they're legal. They are adults. But that's what I'm struggling with as a father is like, how do you
Yeah,
start letting go of being the one to hold them, clothe them, feed them? Like parenting
yeah,
changes over the years, obviously, and that's what I'm struggling with. Like, how do you let go and still be a parent? And Henry said, like, you just have to listen. You don't have to fix their problems. Those days are gone. Like you're there to be a support system, you're there to listen. If they ask you, you give your guidance or your wisdom, but you have to try not to fix their problems. And I was like,
yeah,
okay, I can deal with that.
yeah. It's tough backing off.
Yeah, I have a problem with it myself, so I'm
Yeah, I
not
mean,
good at it. I'm
but
not good at it.
yeah, but we do have a little more information than they do, so it's hard to resist that. Like, but they got to come by their own information. That's the tough part. And like, damn, like, when have I become more myself? Well, I've become more myself when my heart's been broken. I've become more myself when somebody has said, I want a divorce. I've become more myself when I hit a bottom with drugs and alcohol. You know, all the things I would want to protect my kids from were the things that made me more me. So, am I going to get in the way of that? Probably, but I shouldn't.
So last question I'm going to ask is any plans for an additional Del Fuego shows from Seth Levine?
Yeah, we're doing some shows all overseas. So we're going to in June. We're going to start in Amsterdam, uh, Germany. Uh, there might be a Belgium show. Then like 4 or 5 Italian shows and a festival in Spain.
Wow.
And then in
Big time.
November we go back and oh, and then end in London uh, after Spain. I forgot about that. And then when we go back in November, uh, it's more Spain shows, um, some Scandinavian shows. But you know, I'm the youngest of the bunch, and I'm 60. So we're a bunch of guys whose kids are out of the yard, and uh, we can go on these little holidays, and the Del Fuegos pay for it. So it's not like we come home with sacks of money, but everybody's got careers, and so we're not doing it to make money, but we can do it and not have to spend any and have these adventures, which is kind of novel, right?
Yeah.
Couple
Right.
weeks a year, go play for European audiences. It's a kick.
And you love doing it, right? You enjoy playing.
Well, we love doing it, and I'll tell you one of the highlights of the last few shows. I got to do the Eagles "Take It to the Limit."
Wow,
Yeah.
great
Now
song.
that doesn't sound like a Del Fuegos kind of song, but I love the arrangement that we came up with.
Mm.
And and then my son Piero, who I just mentioned, would get up on stage and do Evil Ways with us.
Oh,
Pretty close to the Santana version.
Mm.
Other than that, it's mostly Del Fuego song. But you know, this is fun. Like getting on stage with your kid, that's really fun. Singing "Take It to the Limit." Come on.
one of my favorite Eagles songs. The tell you the truth, I'm hearing all the stuff the Del Fuegos, father, author, teacher. How'd you have time to do this?
Well, I almost didn't get out because when
Yeah,
I
I know.
go,
That's what I was a little bit afraid of. I'm not gonna
yeah,
lie.
when I go to John Landau's house, one part of it is going to be looking at art. And it's such remarkable art. So we've learned that we got to like, let's get to work. Uh, and then we'll do the art.
Mhm.
But the art was, I'm like, am I going to make this podcast? Or am I going to be
You
here
said it's gonna be
looking?
tight, and I was like,
Yeah,
we're gonna okay.
I was looking at masterworks from the Northern Renaissance.
Wow.
Yeah.
Listen, you
It-
could have done the
it-
podcast from John's house. We have
yeah,
no
you
problem with that. I mean, I
you
don't have
gave
a problem with
you,
it.
you gave up looking at fine art to come talk to the three of us. Oh
Hey.
my God.
He's really I've been to a museum with him, a museum that was closed, but small, single artist. Like I can't remember how many sculptures, but it was like 24. It's this collection in Sweden, and it was George Travis, the road manager, John Landau, me, and they open up this collection, and it's another John. And I studied a lot of art history. And so I've got some capacity and he's got a tremendous capacity. And so when we do this, it's hard to stop. But yeah, where do I find the time? I mean, I'm
I'm
I'm a
deeply grateful.
very I'm a fortunate guy because I love these conversations. I love looking at art. I love playing music. I love writing about music. I love teaching. I try to say to my kids like, don't plan on being as lucky as dad. Like it's just not gonna work.
Yeah.
Well, John would have understood. He knows who Spring Nuts is and whatever. If you would have told him you were coming on the Spring Nut podcast, I think he would have been okay with it. So-
Yeah, no
Uh,
doubt.
one final question for me, Warren. Is there another book in the works? Are we going to see another book by Warren Zanes?
Yes, you are.
Woo!
Uh, I'm not sure when, but I'm a good chunk of the way through it. And let's just say it's going to relate to your interests.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Maybe why you were seeing Mr. Landau today, but
We have
Very
ways of
good.
making you talk. We're very persuasive, but in all kidding,
One last
but-
question. Oh, sorry, Howie.
no, I'm good, good.
My last question for you. You've been very generous with us. I've enjoyed this immensely, so I really love this. Just thoughts on hearing as a segue into this question. Bruce was interviewed. Bruce, is there Electric Nebraska? Nope, no such thing exists. A month later, oh, by the way, there is an Electric Nebraska now that we think about it. Any thoughts on Electric Nebraska? And I guess in my
Yeah.
mind, I guess I just wanted to ask your opinion. It's almost like I wouldn't want to not have the Nebraska that we have and what we've lived with all these years. But if he had done Electric Nebraska, like it could have stood up on its own.
Oh yeah. And I wrote a piece in Mojo and did a quick interview with Bruce on that. And the thing that really struck me is that I think, like others, I thought there's Nebraska and there's Born in the USA, and Electric Nebraska is like Born in the USA,
Mhm.
but it's the Nebraska songs. And I don't think I was right. I think the Electric Nebraska is a thing unto itself. It's a different sound. It's not the sound of Born in the USA. It's almost like it doesn't sound retro, but it's like a rockabilly combo almost. But it is a small combo sound which I really like, made me think, like what else was going on? Like Rockpile, Dave Edmunds and Nick Lowe and Rockpile. There were some things that made me go, this is its family. But it was a different species. And the crazy thing is that it made the picture even more complicated for me. I thought he's got two things, born in the USA and Nebraska, and he's going to choose between them. And here's the guy choosing between three things. That is the truth of it. And most artists are lucky to have one. And he's got three. That tells you just something about his sheer output and his creative energy. At one of the most challenging times in his own life, he's sitting on layers of abundance. And, that's just where he's another species to me. It's hard to come up with 12 songs for a record and an aesthetic for that collection, and to have so much and to be willing to put so much on the shelf. Just astounding.
I loved you started out with the book right away. First day of recording the river. I can't do this. I can't do this again. And then a year later, and 80 songs later, here we are.
Yeah. It's I definitely, it's more fun to write about obsessive artists. But to be one, it's quite a job.
Hmm. All right. Howie?
Howie,
Yeah.
that's all I had. That was my last question.
Okay. I just, first of all, Warren, I want to greatly thank you for an amazing time. I wish you could see what I see, because I'm watching comments for the last, hour and 45 minutes, and you blew everybody away. You blew us away. It's been a real honor to
Well,
have you. Really.
yeah,
Truly.
thank you. I mean, I got all kinds of respect for fan communities. Because I belong here.
Oh yeah, you belong here.
Yeah, and that's been one of my happy things in life, is the friendships that are forged because of music that's loved mutually. It's fun to turn people on to music, but there's something deep about coming together with somebody because you're just really into an artist and what they represent. So more power to you guys. Let's meet up again.
Yeah,
absolutely.
when that next book comes out,
Yes.
we're bringing you back, Warren.
Come on
Deal.
back.
Deal.
And for
Real
those of you
pleasure.
at home, if you've not read it, check out his book on Tom Petty. It's just as good as Deliver Me from Nowhere.
Thank you,
Thanks, you
Warren.
guys.
Well, thank you, Warren.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wishing
Thank
you
you.
Really
everything,
appreciate it.
only good things, Warren.
See you down the road.
Yes.
See you
Yes,
down the
sir.
road.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye,
Warren.
Yeah,
guys.
everybody.
Take care.
All right.